The first sound was a high-pitched scream, not of a person, but of metal protesting against physics. It was a sound I knew from 1,000 investigative files, the signature shriek of a catastrophic mechanical failure. It was immediately followed by a sickening crunch of carbon fiber and plastic against concrete, and then a human cry. My daughter's cry, sharp and filled with a terror that ripped through the placid afternoon air and straight into my heart. I was on my feet, sprinting from the porch before the sound had even finished echoing off the houses of our quiet suburban street. My world narrowed to a single point, the bottom of the steep hill that led down from our cul-de-sac. There, crumpled against the curb, was my daughter Maya's motorized wheelchair, its sleek, high-tech frame mangled, one wheel bent at an impossible angle. And beside it, sprawled on the grass verge, was Maya. She was 16, and she was terrifyingly still. A cold, clinical part of my brain, the part that had been honed by 15 years as a Federal Mobility Crimes Investigator, was already analyzing the scene. The trajectory, the lack of skid marks, the catastrophic failure at the point of maximum velocity. It was not an accident. But the father's part of my brain, the part that constituted my entire being, was simply screaming her name. Maya. I reached her, my knees hitting the ground, my hands hovering over her, afraid to touch, afraid of what I might find. Her eyes were closed, her face pale against the green grass. A trickle of blood snaked from a cut on her forehead. "Don't move, sweetheart," I whispered, my voice trembling, my training kicking in, forcing a calm I did not feel. I checked her pulse, strong and fast. I checked her breathing, shallow but steady. "I'm here. Help is on the way." As if summoned by my words, neighbors began to emerge from their homes, drawn by the horrific sounds. Their faces were masks of shock and concern. And then I saw her. Patricia Dunn. She stood on her perfectly manicured lawn at the top of the hill, her arms crossed, her expression, not one of shock, but of grim, righteous satisfaction. It was a look that said, "I told you so." A look that said, "This is what happens when you don't listen to me." In that instant, I knew. The cold, analytical part of my brain and the raging, protective part of my father's heart slammed together with the force of a physical impact. This was not a random failure. This was not a tragic accident. This was sabotage. I looked from Maya's still form to the wrecked machine that was her freedom, to the woman standing like a sentinel at the top of the hill. She saw a reckless child who had finally met her comeuppance. She had no idea she was looking at a federal crime scene. She had no idea that the father of the girl lying bleeding on the grass was the one man in the country whose entire professional existence was dedicated to hunting down people like her. She had tampered with a piece of advanced medical technology, causing grievous harm. She thought she had prevented a future danger. In reality, she had just begun her own downfall, and I would be the one to document every single step of it. Our life was a meticulous dance between technology and biology, between freedom and its limitations. As a lead investigator for the National Transportation Safety Board's little-known but critically important Mobility Crimes Division, my professional life was spent in the wreckage of other people's lives. I investigated sabotaged public elevators, hacked municipal transit systems, and defective medical transport vehicles. I was an expert in the intricate ways that the machines designed to grant people freedom could be turned into weapons. My world was one of forensic engineering reports, metallurgical stress tests, and the quiet, damning testimony of a severed wire or a stripped bolt. This professional precision bled into my personal life. After my wife Anna lost her battle with a rare neurological disorder, 5 years ago, it became just me and Maya. And my most important case became ensuring her safety and maximizing her independence. Maya had inherited her mother's condition, a progressive disease that had taken her ability to walk, but had done nothing to dull her brilliant, fiercely independent spirit. Our home was a testament to our partnership. It was an accessible sanctuary, filled with the tools and tech that allowed Maya to navigate her world. She was no passive recipient of care. At 16, she was a budding robotics engineer, a tech prodigy who could code in 3 languages and solder a circuit board with the skill of a seasoned technician. Her wheelchair wasn't just a medical device. It was her passion project. It was a state-of-the-art machine, yes, but she had modified it herself, writing custom firmware to optimize battery life, designing and 3D printing ergonomic joystick controls, and integrating a voice command system she had coded from scratch. It was an extension of her body, but also of her mind. It was her freedom, and she was its master. We had moved to Summit Ridge 9 months ago, a community nestled in rolling hills, chosen for its good schools and its proximity to Maya's robotics mentorship program. The steep hills were a challenge, but Maya's powerful chair with its advanced motor and regenerative braking system handled them with ease. The community seemed perfect, a blend of families and retirees who valued quiet and safety. What we didn't account for was the Summit Ridge Homeowners Association and its fanatical self-appointed Neighborhood Safety Committee chair, Patricia Dunn. Patricia was a retired emergency room nurse in her late 60s, a woman who carried the memory of 1,000 tragedies like a shield. She saw potential hazards everywhere: a child's toy left on a lawn, a delivery truck parked for too long, a crack in the sidewalk. Her solution was always more rules, more restrictions, more control. She communicated in a tone of cloying, condescending concern that was more unnerving than open hostility. The inciting incident, the first real clash between her worldview and ours, had happened a month before the crash. Patricia had seen Maya navigating the steep hill on our street, using the chair's sport mode to maintain momentum, a standard feature she used with expert skill. Later that day, Patricia appeared at our door. "Mr. Corbin," she began, her voice dripping with false sympathy, "I was so worried seeing your daughter on that hill today. Those chairs can be so unpredictable. She was moving awfully fast. It's a danger to herself and to the other residents." "I appreciate your concern, Mrs. Dunn," I had replied, my voice polite but firm. "But Maya is an expert operator. The chair's systems are fail-safe, and she is always in complete control." "But is it necessary for it to go so fast?" she pressed. "Perhaps the speed governor could be adjusted, for safety." "The chair's speed is well within the federal guidelines for a personal mobility device," I stated, the investigator in me rising to the surface. "And I will not limit my daughter's independence based on unsubstantiated fears. She is safe. The chair is safe." The look on her face was not one of relief, but of profound offense. I had challenged her authority. I had dismissed her expert opinion. I had chosen my daughter's freedom over her demand for absolute sterile control. It was a declaration of war, I realized later. By refusing to bend to her will, I had marked my daughter as a problem to be solved, a variable to be controlled, a threat to be neutralized. The crash at the bottom of the hill was not the beginning of her campaign. It was its terrifying logical conclusion. The wail of the ambulance siren was a welcome sound. The paramedics were professional and swift, stabilizing Maya's neck, assessing her injuries and preparing her for transport. The preliminary diagnosis was a concussion, a fractured wrist, and multiple lacerations, but she was alive. She was conscious, her eyes fluttering open, filled with pain and confusion. That was all that mattered. As they loaded her into the ambulance, the rising action began, a multi-front assault, orchestrated by a woman convinced of her own righteousness. While I rode with Maya to the hospital, my mind a maelstrom of fear and fury, Patricia Dunn was already laying the groundwork for her defense. She spoke to the police officers at the scene, her voice laced with the practiced authority of a former nurse. She recounted her previous warnings to me about the dangers of the wheelchair. She painted a picture of a reckless, headstrong teenager and a negligent father who had refused to listen to her expert advice. She was not just a witness. She was in her narrative the prophet whose dire warnings had tragically come to pass. The first shocking escalation came 2 days later, while Maya was still recovering in the hospital. I received an official notice from the Summit Ridge HOA, delivered via certified mail. It was a formal notice of hazard, citing a violation of a vaguely worded bylaw about safe operation of personal vehicles within the community. The notice, signed by Patricia Dunn as chair of the safety committee, demanded that Maya's wheelchair, upon its repair, be subjected to an independent safety inspection and have its maximum speed permanently governed by an HOA-approved technician. Until we complied, Maya was prohibited from operating her wheelchair on any community property, including the sidewalks and roads. It was a breathtakingly cruel and audacious move. They were attempting to strip my daughter of her right to move freely within her own neighborhood, to imprison her in our home. They were using the very incident Patricia had caused to justify the exact restrictions she had wanted all along. It was a bureaucratic cudgel designed to punish the victim and validate the perpetrator. I immediately called the HOA president, a mild-mannered man named Mr. Gable, who was terrified of conflict. "This is an illegal infringement on my daughter's rights under the Americans with Disabilities Act." I told him, my voice cold and hard. "This notice is discriminatory and unenforceable, and it is based on the false testimony of the person who I believe is responsible for my daughter's injuries." Gable stammered and sputtered. "Well, Patricia is very concerned about safety, Mr. Corbin. She has a background in medicine." The board felt we had to take her concerns seriously. The second shocking incident was more insidious, a campaign of psychological warfare. Patricia began a smear campaign among the neighbors. She went door to door, her face a mask of sorrowful concern, telling people how she had tried to warn me, how the tragic but inevitable accident could have been prevented if only I had listened. She spread rumors that Maya was reckless, that she raced down the hills, that she had been showing off. She created a false narrative, and some people eager to find a simple explanation for a horrifying event bought it. We started getting looks from neighbors, a mixture of pity and disapproval. A few parents told their children not to play near our house. We were being subtly, systematically isolated. Patricia was not just trying to control Maya's mobility. She was trying to poison her reputation and sever our connection to the community. The worst part was the direct bullying. When Maya finally returned from the hospital, her arm in a cast and her confidence shattered, Patricia escalated her tactics. She couldn't stop Maya from using the chair on our own property, but she could make it a miserable experience. If Maya was on our driveway, Patricia would stand on her lawn and watch her. Her arms crossed her face, a mask of stern judgment. She began taking pictures, documenting, as she told another neighbor loudly enough for us to hear, any unsafe maneuvers. She was trying to intimidate a 16-year-old girl who had just survived a traumatic crash. She was turning our home, our sanctuary, into a place of constant scrutiny and fear. She was waging a war of attrition, hoping to make our lives so unbearable that we would simply give up and leave. But Patricia had made a fatal miscalculation. She assumed I was just a father. She didn't realize I was an investigator. And while she was busy with her campaign of whispers and dirty tricks, I was busy conducting a quiet, meticulous, and damning investigation of my own, starting with the mangled wreckage of my daughter's wheelchair. The truth, I knew, was not in the neighborhood gossip. It was in the metal. The wheelchair was my crime scene. I had it transported not to a medical supply repair shop, but to the secure evidence garage at my federal building. Under the harsh, unforgiving fluorescent lights, I began my work. The external damage was obvious: the bent frame, the shattered housing of the joystick control, the mangled wheel. But I was looking for something else. I was looking for the point of failure. I was looking for intent. I called in a favor from an old friend, Ben Carter, a brilliant mechanical engineer who had consulted on several of my past cases. Together, we spent hours poring over the wreckage, our movements slow and deliberate, like archaeologists excavating a delicate fossil. We documented every scratch, every dent, every broken piece. The regenerative braking system is completely fried, Ben said, pointing to the blackened wires leading from the main drive motor. It's what she would have used to control her speed on the downhill. When it failed, she would have had no way to slow down. But what caused the failure? I asked, my voice tight. A power surge. A faulty component. That's the thing. Ben said, his brow furrowed in concentration. He aimed a high-intensity lamp at the spot where the main brake line connected to the motor's control unit. Look at this. I leaned in closer. The brake line, a thin braided steel cable, had been severed. But it wasn't a clean snap as you'd see from metal fatigue. It was frayed with tiny, almost microscopic scoring marks along the edge. It's been cut, I whispered, a cold certainty settling in my stomach. Partially cut just enough so that the stress of a steep downhill run would cause it to snap. It was a classic act of sabotage, elegant in its cruelty, difficult to detect without a forensic examination. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing, Ben said, his voice grim. They knew that cutting it all the way would be obvious. This way, it looks like an accident. This was the proof I needed for the criminal case. But then, as we delved deeper into the chair's complex electronics, we found the midpoint twist, the detail that blew the case wide open and changed everything I thought I knew about Patricia Dunn. Tucked away near the primary motor controller was a small, custom-built microprocessor, a component I hadn't even known was there. It was one of Maya's own modifications, a sophisticated little chip she had designed and programmed herself to provide real-time feedback on motor torque and battery performance. It was her secret sauce, the brain behind her chair's superior performance. And the chip had been deliberately damaged. There was a small, almost surgical crack across its surface, and one of the delicate connector pins had been bent at a precise 90-degree angle. Ben and I stared at it in stunned silence. "This is different," Ben said, his voice hushed. The cut on the brake line was crude, done with wire snips or something similar. This, he gestured to the damaged chip, this is delicate work. This required a specific tool, an anti-static probe, and a deep understanding of microelectronics. This is not the work of a random vandal or a retired nurse. He was right. Patricia Dunn, with her talk of safety and governors, couldn't possibly have known about this custom chip, let alone how to disable it so subtly. The implications were staggering. Either she had an accomplice, someone with a high level of technical expertise, or Patricia Dunn was not who she appeared to be. The revelation sent me down a new investigative rabbit hole. I ran a deep background check on her, going far beyond the standard public records. I searched for any connection to engineering, to electronics, to robotics. And then I found it. Her late husband, Richard Dunn, hadn't been an accountant, as the neighborhood lore suggested. He had been a senior robotics engineer, a brilliant but troubled pioneer in the field of personal mobility technology. And the company he had worked for, the company he had been a lead designer at for over 20 years, was Cyberdyne Mobility, the company that had manufactured the base model of Maya's wheelchair. I felt a jolt, as if I had touched a live wire. I kept digging. I discovered that Richard Dunn had been fired from Cyberdyne Mobility a decade ago, disgraced, after a catastrophic failure of a new prototype during a public demonstration. An advanced AI-driven wheelchair he had designed had malfunctioned, lost control, and caused a serious accident, injuring several people. The company had blamed him, citing his reckless and unauthorized modifications to the core programming. He had been blacklisted from the industry, and according to a brief obituary, he had died of a heart attack less than a year later. The final horrifying piece of the puzzle fell into place when I cross-referenced the date and location of that public demonstration with Patricia's nursing career. She had been on duty in the emergency room that day. The tragic accident she had witnessed, the one that had so deeply traumatized her and twisted her sense of safety, was not some random event. It was the very incident that had destroyed her husband's career, his reputation, and she surely believed his life. Her obsession, her rage was not just a generalized fear. It was a deeply personal 15-year-old vendetta. She didn't just hate unsafe mobility devices. She hated Cyberdyne mobility and the advanced user-modified technology she blamed for her husband's death. And my daughter Maya, with her brilliant custom-coded state-of-the-art Cyberdyne chair, was the living, breathing embodiment of everything she had grown to loathe. She wasn't just a concerned neighbor. She was a woman driven by a profound, misdirected grief, a ghost in the machine of her own past. And she had targeted my daughter not just as a nuisance, but as a symbol of the technology that had taken everything from her. The case had just become infinitely more complex and infinitely more tragic. The emergency HOA meeting was Patricia's battlefield, and she had chosen the terrain. She had framed it as a community safety forum, a chance for residents to voice their concerns in the wake of Maya's unfortunate accident. Her goal was clear: to cement her narrative of Maya's recklessness, to validate her own warnings, and to ram through her proposed restrictions on all personal mobility devices in Summit Ridge. She was using my daughter's tragedy as political leverage to achieve the control she had craved all along. The community center's meeting room was tense, the air thick with nervous energy. Patricia and her small, grim-faced safety committee sat at a table at the front, arranged like a panel of inquisitors. Patricia herself was the picture of sorrowful authority, her face set in lines of grave concern. Mr. Gable, the HOA president, fidgeted nervously beside her. I sat in the audience with Ben Carter, my engineer friend. On the chair next to me was a heavy, locked briefcase. Maya was at home recovering. She had wanted to come her spirit defiant, but I wouldn't allow it. This was my fight to finish. Mr. Gable opened the meeting with a weak appeal for a respectful and productive conversation. Then he turned the floor over to Patricia. Her performance was chillingly effective. She spoke with the practiced authority of a medical professional, using technical-sounding jargon to create an illusion of expertise. She described the inherent instability of high-powered wheelchairs, the dangers of user modifications, and the unacceptable risks they posed in a hilly environment like ours. She never mentioned Maya by name, but she didn't have to. Everyone knew who she was talking about. The tragic accident last week was a wake-up call for all of us. She concluded, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion. It is our solemn responsibility, as a community, as neighbors, to ensure something like this never happens again. That is why the Safety Committee is proposing a mandatory binding resolution to require professional certification and speed governing on all motorized mobility devices operated within Summit Ridge. She had laid her trap. She had used fear and pseudoscience to corner the community into accepting a discriminatory, illegal, and deeply personal attack on my daughter's freedom. Before Mr. Gable could even call for a discussion, I stood up. "I'd like to address the committee," I said, my voice cutting through the tense silence. All eyes swiveled to me. Patricia gave me a look of cold, triumphant pity. She thought I was about to make an emotional losing appeal. I walked to the front of the room and placed my briefcase on the podium. My name is Alex Corbin. As some of you now know, I am a federal investigator. My specific field is mobility crimes. For 15 years, I have investigated accidents exactly like the one that injured my daughter. And I can tell you with absolute certainty that what happened to Maya was not an accident. A murmur of shock rippled through the crowd. Patricia's face tightened, her mask of concern slipping for a fraction of a second. My daughter's wheelchair did not malfunction. I continued, my voice steady and cold. It was deliberately sabotaged. The main brake line was partially severed in a way designed to cause a catastrophic failure under maximum stress. I opened my briefcase and removed a large, high-resolution photograph of the cut cable. I placed it on an easel for the whole room to see. These are the tool marks. The room erupted in gasps. Mr. Gable looked horrified. Patricia, however, recovered quickly. "That's a terrible accusation," she declared, rising to her feet. "Are you suggesting one of her neighbors would do such a thing?" "I am not suggesting it. I am stating it as a fact," I said, my gaze locked on her. But the sabotage was even more sophisticated than that. I placed a second photograph on the easel, a magnified image of Maya's custom microprocessor. This component, a chip my daughter designed herself, was also disabled. This required a level of technical expertise far beyond that of a common vandal. It required knowledge of robotics. It required knowledge of the specific architecture of a Cyberdyne mobility wheelchair. I let that hang in the air for a moment. It's a strange coincidence, isn't it, that the chair was a Cyberdyne model. The same company where your late husband Richard Dunn was a senior robotics engineer. The color drained from Patricia's face. The foundation of her deception was cracking. "He was a brilliant man," I said, my voice softening slightly, becoming a narrative. "But he was disgraced. Fired after a prototype he designed malfunctioned and caused a terrible accident. An accident that you, as an ER nurse, personally witnessed. You blame Cyberdyne technology for ruining his career and his life. You've carried that hatred for a decade. And then my daughter arrived. A brilliant young engineer in her own right, mastering and modifying the very technology you've grown to despise. She wasn't a danger to you, Patricia. She was a ghost. She was a symbol of everything you lost. And you targeted her. You used your grief as a weapon." "This is insane! You have no proof!" she shrieked, her voice shrill with panic. "Don't I said quietly. I placed a third photo on the easel. It was a picture of a specialized anti-static electronics probe. The forensic metallurgist found microscopic traces of a beryllium copper alloy on my daughter's damaged microprocessor, an alloy used in high-end electronic diagnostic tools. Like this one. I looked directly at her. "The police searched your home this afternoon, Patricia, with a warrant. They found your husband's old toolkit in the back of your garage, and they found this exact probe with microscopic fragments of my daughter's circuit board still on its tip." It was over. The room was utterly silent, the residents staring at her with a mixture of horror and pity. Her elaborate construction of lies built on a foundation of real tragic grief had been systematically dismantled, piece by damning piece. At that moment, two plainclothes federal agents, my colleagues, entered the room. They walked calmly to Patricia. "Patricia Dunn," the lead agent said, his voice devoid of emotion. "You're under arrest for felony assault, willful destruction of property, and violation of the Federal Protection of Individuals with Disabilities Act. Please put your hands behind your back." As they led her away, a weeping, broken woman, the community sat in stunned silence, witnesses to a climax that was not just about a crime, but about the tragic, violent collision of past and present, of grief and technology, of a mother's pain and a father's unwavering fight for justice. The aftermath was a swift and unraveling of Patricia Dunn's world. The federal charges, backed by the irrefutable forensic evidence, were airtight. The story of her tragic past and her vengeful, misguided crusade became a local media sensation, a cautionary tale about the dark places where grief can lead. Faced with the mountain of evidence, the cut cable, the damaged chip, the tool from her husband's workshop, she accepted a plea agreement rather than face a jury. The sentence was substantial years in a federal prison, a place where her obsessive need for control would be rendered utterly meaningless. The falling action for the Summit Ridge community was a painful but necessary reckoning. The HOA was thrown into turmoil. Mr. Gable resigned immediately, as did the other members of the so-called safety committee. The residents, horrified that they had been manipulated and had been complicit in the harassment of a child, were forced to confront their own passivity. They had listened to Patricia's rhetoric of safety without questioning the prejudice that lay beneath it. In a special meeting, they voted unanimously to dissolve the existing HOA and its draconian bylaws. Working with my office and legal experts from the ADA, they started from scratch, drafting a new community charter founded on principles of inclusivity, accessibility, and mutual respect. The steep hills of Summit Ridge, which Patricia had used as an excuse for her discriminatory rules, became the impetus for a community-led project to install new safer ramps and handrails, making the neighborhood more accessible for everyone. The resolution for Maya was a journey of both physical and emotional healing. Her body mended, but the psychological trauma of the crash, the betrayal by a neighbor, lingered. Her confidence was shaken. For a time, she was afraid to even sit in her repaired wheelchair. But she was not alone. Her friends from her robotics club rallied around her. Led by our neighbor Ben Carter, they didn't just help her repair the chair, they helped her redesign it. They spent weeks in our garage, which became a bustling workshop filled with laughter music and the smell of soldering fumes. They worked with Maya to reinforce the frame, to design a more advanced multi-source braking system with both mechanical and electronic fail-safes, and to build in a new diagnostic system that would alert her to any tampering. The act of rebuilding her chair was an act of reclaiming her power. She was not just a victim of a crime. She was an engineer, solving a problem, making her own world safer. Months later, on a crisp autumn afternoon, I stood at the top of our hill. The community was holding a small reopening ceremony for a newly installed accessibility ramp leading to the neighborhood park. Maya was the guest of honor. She sat in her rebuilt wheelchair, a machine that was now a testament not to her vulnerability, but to her resilience. It was stronger, smarter, and safer than before, a gleaming symbol of her spirit. She gave a short speech, her voice clear and strong, talking about the importance of designing a world that works for everyone. When she finished, she navigated down the new ramp, and then turned to face the steep hill of our street, the site of her crash. She took a deep breath, looked at me, and smiled. Then, with a confident push of the joystick, she ascended the hill, her movement smooth and effortless. I watched her go, my heart filled with a mixture of pride and a profound sense of peace. The wreckage of the past had been cleared away. The ghost that had haunted Patricia Dunn had been laid to rest, and the systems of justice and community had for once worked as they should. We had faced a darkness born of tragedy, and had answered it with technology, with friendship, and with an unyielding belief in a future where everyone has the freedom to move forward. Maya had not just climbed a hill. She had conquered a mountain, and her path ahead was clear.